Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're taking a closer look at the Moorish Empire in Europe .pdf, a historical text one of our listeners sent our way. It's packed with fascinating stories about Moorish Spain.
Oh yeah, lots of stuff about cultural blends and these opulent cities they built and, just tons of twists and turns.
Really fascinating stuff. So we're going to try to cover how the Moors came to power, the details of their rule, and the ways their legacy still impacts Spain today.
One thing that tends to surprise people is how the text describes pre-Islamic Arabia.
Mm.
You might think it was just a barren backwater, but it was actually a hub for trade with these bustling routes all across the peninsula.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had everything from coffee and cotton to frankincense.
So not just regional trade, they were connected to a wider world.
Exactly.
It really challenges the stereotypes some people have, right?
Absolutely.
And the text also talks about their culture, their poetry, their deep respect for family history, and their complex social structures, especially for women. It's a world that feels familiar in some ways, but also so different from what came after with Islamic society.
You've hit on a key point there. Seeing that difference in pre-Islamic Arabia helps us understand how big of a change Islam brought.
Hmm.
Think about it. Social structures, their values, even the very fabric of their society was totally reshaped.
I guess it makes you wonder if that openness to trade and different cultures in Islamic Arabia actually helped Islam spread so quickly. Like maybe being exposed to all those different ideas made them more receptive.
That's an interesting question. It's very possible that early exposure played a part in how they embraced new ideas and integrated them.
Yeah.
The text definitely emphasizes how crucial this period is to understanding the impact of Islam, which, as you know, soon spread way beyond Arabia.
And speaking of impact, the source then introduces us to Muhammad. It's interesting because it points out that Christendom wasn't exactly peaceful when he was born.
Right.
There were internal conflicts and moral decline. It kind of sounds like things were ready to explode.
You need to understand that context to really see why a new faith like Islam could take root and spread so rapidly. People were looking for answers, for unity, for a sense of purpose. The existing power structures just weren't working for them.
And Muhammad's story is pretty captivating. The text goes into his early life, his first revelation, the persecution he faced, and of course the Hijra to Medina.
Right.
Just to clarify for anyone who doesn't know, that journey marks the start of the Islamic calendar, and it was a turning point for the faith.
Yeah. The Hijra was more than just a physical journey. It was symbolic, too. It represents the moment when Islam went from a new religion to a real political power, with its own identity and a growing community.
And from there, the story moves on to the conquest of Spain. We meet Musa, this Moorish general, with a pretty interesting backstory. He actually started in disgrace, financially speaking, but he ended up as a major player in the conquest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Musa's story tells us a lot about power in the Moorish Empire. It wasn't rigid. There was room to move up. Personal connections mattered, ambition, and being able to navigate all the political complexities. Those were key to surviving and moving up the ranks. It makes you wonder how often these dramatic rises and falls happened back then.
The text really paints a vivid picture of the conquest itself. Opulent cities like Merida falling to the Moors, the Visigoth rulers being betrayed, and even Jewish allies playing a surprisingly big role. It was this whole web of alliances and betrayals.
The conquest of Spain was a huge turning point, not just for the Iberian Peninsula, but for all of Europe. A new religious and cultural force had arrived, and it was there to stay. It set the stage for centuries of interaction and conflict between Muslims and Christians. And then you add the Jewish allies into the mix, which makes things even more complex.
Definitely. And ruling Spain wasn't exactly easy for the Moors either. The source talks about all these internal struggles, especially the rivalry between the Arab and Berber factions. Can you imagine trying to keep control of such a huge and diverse area with all that tension simmering below the surface? It must have been exhausting.
Absolutely. Ruling a place as big and diverse as Spain was a huge challenge. Those conflicts within the empire were always threatening their stability and left them open to attacks from the Christian kingdoms up north.
Right.
In the end, all that internal strife weakens them.
But even with those challenges, the text points out some amazing figures who managed to not only hold things together, but actually thrive, at least for a while, like Abd al-Rahman. Imagine escaping a massacre in Damascus and then going on to found a whole new dynasty in Spain.
Yeah,
That takes some serious resilience and a bit of daring.
definitely. And then you've got al-Mansur. He was a powerful minister who led successful military campaigns despite the limitations of his background. These stories show us what leadership looked like back then, the role of ambition, and just how hard it was to hold on to power in such a multicultural empire. It was a constant balancing act, juggling different groups, different ambitions, and always being aware of threats from outside.
It makes you curious about what life was really like for the everyday person in Moorish Spain with all this political drama going on. Did they feel the impact of these power struggles, or were they living in relative peace and prosperity, at least for a time?
That's a great question. And it's one we'll definitely explore more as we get deeper into the culture and society of Moorish Spain. Don't forget, we're just getting started with this deep dive. We've barely scratched the surface of this fascinating period.
I'm excited to uncover more. Next, we'll be looking at the cultural and intellectual legacy of Moorish Spain, especially their famous city of Cordoba. Get ready for amazing architecture, a thriving intellectual scene, and some surprising advancements that might just change how you think about this era.
It's a story about the power of cultural exchange and the huge impact it can have on the course of history. So we were talking about how tough it was to rule Moorish Spain, all those internal problems bubbling under the surface. When you dig deeper into this source, you see those struggles really played a part in how the empire eventually fell. It wasn't just a simple Christian reconquest, it was way more complicated.
Right. It shows that even powerful empires like the Moors weren't invincible. They were vulnerable to pressure from within just as much as from outside. The text really emphasizes the tension between those Arab and Berber factions. Could you break that down a bit more for us?
Sure thing. The Berbers, they were the original people of North Africa, and they often felt sidelined by the Arab rulers. They knew they were crucial to the empire's success, but they didn't like the Arabs having all the power. So you had all these rebellions and uprisings constantly popping up, which destabilized things and weakened them from the inside.
So they were basically fighting a war on two fronts, trying to hold off the Christian kingdoms in the north while also keeping their own people in check. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. It's the classic case of a house divided. While the Moors were busy fighting each other, the Christian kingdoms were getting stronger and more organized. They saw the Moors' weakness and took advantage of it.
Makes you wonder if things could have been different if the Moors had been more united. Maybe they could have held off the Christians longer or even stopped the Reconquista altogether.
It's an interesting thought experiment. Hard to know for sure, but it shows how important it is to be unified when you're facing threats from outside. The source really hammers home the point that being divided internally can be just as dangerous as having an enemy army at your doorstep.
And it wasn't just political and social divides, right?
Right.
The text mentions economic stuff playing a part in their decline, too. So it's not just a simple religious conflict.
You got it.
Yeah.
There were also economic rivalries, competition for resources, both within the Moorish Empire and between them and the Christian kingdoms. It was a slow and complex decline, a whole bunch of internal and external forces at play, political, social, economic, and religious.
It really shows you how everything's connected. One little event or internal conflict can snowball into something huge and take down an entire empire. Speaking of individuals, one that stands out in the source is Abd al-Rahman III. He declared himself Caliph of Cordoba in 929. What made him make such a bold move?
Well, that was a big moment in Moorish Spanish history.
Hmm.
By calling himself Caliph, Abd al-Rahman III was basically saying, hey, I don't answer to the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. He was claiming independence and saying Moorish Spain was a legitimate power. Think about how audacious that was. He didn't want to just be a regional player. He wanted to be seen as the leader of the Islamic world in the West.
Sounds like he was a pretty smart strategist, too. He wasn't just making a symbolic statement. He actually went on to create a period of real prosperity and achievement in Al-Andalus. That's what the Moors called their part of Spain.
Yeah. Abd al-Rahman III was a brilliant politician and a skilled military leader. He managed to put down rebellions, strengthen his power base, and defend against outside threats. Cordoba really flourished under him. It became one of the most vibrant, sophisticated cities in all of Europe, a center for learning the arts and trade.
The text describes it as this cosmopolitan hub, with scholars and artists coming from all over. You get a sense of a society that's really thriving, pushing the boundaries of knowledge and creativity.
Exactly. Abd al-Rahman III supported the arts and sciences and brought all these bright minds to his court. Cordoba had libraries full of ancient Greek and Roman texts, alongside works by Islamic scholars. It's a real melting pot of cultures and ideas, and its influence went far beyond Al-Andalus. It makes you question the whole idea of a dark ages in Europe. Clearly, there were places where things were bright.
It is incredible to think that while so much of Europe was struggling, Cordoba was having this golden age of culture and intellect. Sounds like a time of amazing progress and innovation. But like all golden ages, it couldn't last forever. What caused it to decline?
Well, the text mentions that after Abd al-Rahman III died, things got unstable politically. There was a lot of internal strife again. His successors weren't as skilled as he was, and they had trouble holding on to such a large, diverse territory. All those old tensions between different factions flared up again.
And the Christian kingdoms were still pushing from the north, right? They hadn't given up on the Reconquista.
Exactly. The Reconquista was gaining momentum. The Christian kingdoms were getting more unified, and their campaigns to retake land from the Moors were becoming more aggressive. They had some big wins, too, like the capture of Toledo in 1085. That was a major turning point. It was a big blow to the Moors, both symbolically and strategically.
So the Moorish Empire's decline was gradual, with both internal and external factors contributing. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but more of a slow loss of power and influence.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It was this complex mix of political maneuvering, shifting alliances, military campaigns, and that constant underlying problem of internal division. By the 13th century, the Moors were basically confined to the small kingdom of Granada in the south.
And even Granada eventually fell to the Christians in 1492. That marked the end of Moorish presence in Spain after almost 8 centuries. It's kind of a bittersweet story in a way. On the one hand, it's amazing to think about this small group of Arab and Berber warriors conquering and ruling such a huge area for so long. But then it's also sad to see how internal conflicts and pressures from outside ultimately led to their downfall.
It reminds us that even the strongest empires aren't immune to the forces of history. The Moorish legacy in Spain is complicated. It's a mix of achievements and failures. And it's a legacy that still shapes Spanish culture and identity today. Think about the architecture of the Alhambra or flamenco music. Those are just a couple of examples of how Moorish influence still lingers.
It really makes you wonder how different Spain would be today if the Reconquista had never happened or if it had gone differently. What parts of Moorish culture might have survived, and how would that have changed the cultural landscape of modern Spain?
Now that's a fascinating question to think about. The story of the Moors in Spain isn't just ancient history. It's part of who we are today. And as we dive into their cultural legacy in the next part, you'll see just how profound and lasting their impact really was.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about the big picture stuff, the rise and fall of the Moorish Empire, all the political drama and power struggles. But now I want to shift gears a bit and focus on the people who lived in Al-Andalus. What was it like for them day to day? Like, imagine walking the streets of Cordoba, experiencing their culture firsthand.
This is where the source material really shines. It paints this amazing picture of a society that was way ahead of its time in many ways. Take Cordoba, for example, their most famous city. You wouldn't be walking down dirt roads. They had paved streets lit by streetlights, a far cry from the muddy, dark cities you'd find in most of Europe back then.
Wow, that's hard to imagine, especially when we think about the Dark Ages. Cordoba sounds almost modern with those features, but it gets even more surprising.
Yeah.
The text mentions they had a pretty advanced plumbing system, too.
Exactly. Most of Europe was dealing with basic sanitation issues, but Cordoba had public baths, a whole water management system, and even sewage disposal.
Right.
It wasn't just about technology. It shows they were really focused on public health and urban planning, which was pretty advanced for the time.
It makes you think about the people who lived there. Did they appreciate all that? Did
Yeah.
they take it for granted, or were they aware of how different their lives were compared to people in other parts of Europe?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And it's not just about city planning. The source also talks about their agricultural innovations.
Yeah.
The Moors brought new crops and irrigation techniques to Spain.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they brought things like rice, sugarcane, citrus fruits from the east. And they developed these irrigation systems that let them farm land that was pretty dry.
So they weren't just adapting to the existing environment. They were actively changing it, bringing new knowledge and techniques that had a real impact on the Spanish economy. It challenges that image of conquerors just imposing their will. They were innovators, too.
Exactly. It wasn't just about forcing their culture on others. They blended and mixed with the people who were already there. This fusion of cultures is one of the most fascinating things about Moorish Spain. Think about their architecture with those intricate designs, or the music of flamenco, those haunting melodies. Even the stories of chivalry and romance in Spanish literature. You can see traces of Moorish influence everywhere.
It's amazing how those echoes of their culture are still around today. Even the Spanish language itself was shaped by them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So many common Spanish words have Arabic roots: alcalde, guitarra, azúcar. They're woven into the language itself, a reminder of the Moors' lasting legacy in Spain.
It really makes you think what we consider Spanish culture now is actually this mix of influences, a testament to centuries of interaction and exchange. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Moorish Spain, I have to ask, why should this history matter to us today?
Well, it's a story that forces us to rethink what we know about the past and reminds us that history is never black and white. The Moors weren't just conquerors, they were builders, innovators. They created a sophisticated culture that had a huge impact on Europe. Their story highlights the importance of cultural exchange and how diversity can enrich a society.
It also makes us think about those what-ifs in history. What if the Reconquista had never happened? How would Spain or even all of Europe be different today? It's a question that makes you realize how the choices made in the past have shaped the world we live in.
For sure. The story of the Moors in Spain is like a journey through time, a glimpse into a world that was both familiar and totally different from our own. It's a story of ambition, conflict, cultural exchange, and ultimately the lasting power of ideas and legacies that continue to shape us.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Moorish Spain. We hope you'll keep exploring this history, challenge your own assumptions, and discover the connections between then and now.